Normally I have to hush a crowd with something before I say anything, and all of a sudden the crowd said it's time by quieting down. Congratulations, you guys are great. You're working up a queue here. I'm so pleased to be here today to again work with the Center for Public Policy Priorities, Dr. Deviney, the Casey Foundation, and many others in bringing to the community's attention the status of children in the state of Texas. I've kind of been on children's issues all my life. Being a parent of 5, I know all about raising them. They're not yet raised. Having one disabled child, I know all about the difficulties of getting children through any of the systems necessary to support them. I've always wanted for the children of San Antonio what I have struggled to find for my own children. Good life, good education, good relationships, a good future, good health. And it's always been sad that so many fall through the cracks of our society. It's always sad that the many advocates like you out there that are trying their best to change the outcomes for so many children in San Antonio and South Texas and Texas have such a difficult job getting it done. I spent 20 years, as I was telling Councilman Saldaña, as the Director of Human Services, Community Initiatives, Human Services again, for the City of San Antonio, and developed and supported and ran most of the children's services programs in Bexar County for many years. I left that to head Methodist Healthcare Ministries, and we've grown in the last 17 years to become the largest healthcare funder nonprofit in South Texas for primary care, dental care, children's services, and the like. And we'll end this year putting $72 million into the community for children's services, for adult services, for the communities of South Texas to fund every FQHC and a lot of you here today. So my life in 2 jobs in 37 years has been all about service to the community. And so it's no wonder that we're so pleased to be part with CPQ to bring this report to you, to work with you on the outcomes of this report, and to continue to advocate for children's issues throughout everything we do in every place in every way. There are too few of us. There have always been too few of us. And so I'll give you a word of advice. Don't be friendly, be aggressive. Don't be assertive, be nasty. I'm sorry. A life in this business has taught me one thing, and that is, children and people who are distressed in life really can't advocate for themselves very well. We are, taken care of. We are well educated, we're smart, we're healthy, and we should be that voice, and that voice needs to be one that's out there aggressively taking positions on children's issues and pushing those issues forward. And so you'll have today another piece of material to use to change the outcomes of city councils, to change the outcomes of county commissioners, to change the outcomes of every organization that you work with, and to move the needle a little bit. I only take solace in one thing, because it's very hard to see the big needle move. I take solace in what happens to a patient or a client. I track them. I tell my staff to pull representative sample files. And when they do, they show me that on an individual basis, progress gets made. Dental problems get taken care of, primary care gets taken care of, daycare gets taken care of, abuse and neglect that gets taken care of, teenage pregnancy gets reduced on an individual basis. And so I encourage all of you to continue to do all of that, and thank you for all that work that you do in our communities. I want to recognize a couple of staff that are here. First of all, we have the staff for Senator Uresti, the staff for Representative Cortez, the staff for Representative Villarreal, and the staff for Representative Ruth Jones McClendon. If they're here, can they stand to be recognized? And thank you for being here for your representatives. Thank you, appreciate it. And we have representing himself, none other than the District Court Judge Peter Sakai. Peter, could you please stand? Peter and I share a long history of advocating for children's services. We go back to 1977? Oh my God. And it's been a great job and a great life. Today it's my privilege and pleasure to present to you Councilman Rey Saldaña, representing District 4 for the City of San Antonio, who will talk about this report. Councilman Saldaña has an enormously impressive resume. And as I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, all right, here's a guy who's going to be an advocate for the community, a guy who grew up on the south side of San Antonio, went to South San High School, got a scholarship to go to Stanford, finished Stanford, got himself a master's degree from Stanford in policy, organizational leadership through the Stanford School of Education, and a man who's been committed greatly to the needs of San Antonio. Someone who can take on for the next 20 or 30 years of his life advocating for the least served and children and educational issues in San Antonio. At Stanford, Councilman Saldaña worked with the John W. Gardner Center, Stanford's Institute for Research and Education Policy, to promote educational advancement through collaborative research. He served as a coordinator for Kids with Dreams. He's a man who is an advocate for children's services in everything that he does. And since January 2011, Councilman Saldaña has taught a course on urban education at Trinity University. Now, I remember many council members who've come through my lifetime in San Antonio, none of whom have had as an impressive resume as you have. And I will tell you that obviously, as the current group moves on, this city is yours, and I wish you luck with it. I will also tell you one last thing. I'm a very unpopular person when it comes to education. I didn't understand when I came here in 1975 why we had 16 school districts. Now, I was paid to do research on healthcare and health and human services, and I did that. But, I had a brain, and I was looking at all this data, and I was looking at the outcomes for our children in San Antonio, and they were terrible. And so I did independent research for the city, which was sandbagged, to look at why did we have 16 school districts? And then, of course, I saw the issues of segregation, and those are the reasons. And at the end of the day, it amazed me that in the 40 years that I've been in San Antonio, we haven't blown up the 16, 17, 18 school districts we have now into 4, which was the recommendation from IDRA and others. And so I think you have your work cut out for you in another arena of education, if that's what you want to take on. You'll be a very unpopular person, probably not electable to higher office, but you'll have a purpose in your life. Councilman Saldaña.
Good morning to everyone. All righty. Well, first of all, let me thank First Methodist Healthcare Ministries and Kevin Moriarty for their continued support of this program and for your welcoming and challenging words. Let me also pause to thank the Center for Public Policy Priorities for inviting me to be here, and Dr. Deviney, Francis Deviney, who has been just incredible in helping to organize and coordinate, and really will be giving you the meat of the Kids Count report at the end of my talk. But I want to welcome those folks who are not from San Antonio to San Antonio, and just quickly tell you that we are a city that is not only quickly growing, but a city on the rise, a city that is growing not in just population, but in its business growth, and in its investment portfolio here in the city. You see, we in the city understand that the most important asset that we have is our people. And as long as you are investing in your people and the prosperity that goes along with the future of those people, then you are in a great position. So please, if this is your first time in San Antonio, make sure that it is not your last. I want to really make sure that everybody is welcome to the idea that what we're doing here in this city is challenging ourselves, and I'll go into what those challenges are to invest in our people. But before I do that, I want to tell you how I got to know the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And this was several years ago while I was in graduate school at the School of Education at Stanford. And as somebody who was focused on San Antonio and who was focused on Texas, a lot of my research was really centered around what was happening in the state of Texas. So a lot of my research reports, a lot of my evidence, a lot of my cited work was from the Center for Public Policy Priorities. And the papers that I wrote and the presentations that I gave, and I gave all credit where credit was due to the great researchers at the Center for Public Policy Priorities. But what I really enjoyed about getting to know them was that I haven't talked to Dr. Deviney, and she may not know this story, but as I was getting close to graduation time, I thought to myself that I wanted to come back to San Antonio, or actually that I wanted to come back to Texas first. And I'd known so much about the Center for Public Policy Priorities that I wanted to apply to work there. And so Dr. Deviney and I, she may not know this, had a conversation while I was still on the Stanford campus, and I was asking her about the opportunities, and in the nicest way possible, she told me there was no room for me. I'm telling you, it was one of the best ways that anybody could be let down and told that you didn't get the job. So, I did what most folks do who find out that the hard-hitting world of research and quantitative analysis and hard data that goes along with academia, I do what most people do when they don't fit into that world. I ran for public office. And so here I am now, and I got to say that the story, though, of leaving San Antonio and moving outside of Texas, it's really interesting. I think there needs to be research done on this if the Center for Public Policy Priorities hasn't done this. And I think this story is probably true of some people here in San Antonio that in the state of Texas, is the second that you leave the state, you are filled with this overzealous pride as a Texan. It is a illness without much medicine, but with a lot of symptoms. Your dorm has the state Texas flag in it. You're constantly wearing your "everything is bigger in Texas" t-shirt. I don't know what it is, but you leave Texas and you become the biggest Texan Lone Star State fan, and to the point that it is almost unbearable for those folks who are not from the state. But I have to say that it is for a justified reason that Texas is admired by those folks who are from here, and also admired by those folks who are not from Texas. There is a lot to be proud of, but I think there's a lot of work to be done so that we might be optimistic about Texas's future. And that includes an understanding in Texas that we are really the breeding ground. We are the center of gravity for the future of this country. That Texas has the majority of the U.S. student and child population growth was happening in the state of Texas for the last 10 years. And so when Texas does well, when Texas does better, the U.S. does better. And in San Antonio, we believe that the mayor is constantly talking about San Antonio being the face of the new American dream. That San Antonio looks like the Texas of tomorrow, and of course Texas looks like the country in the U.S. of tomorrow. And that if we are going to be optimistic about it, and I have to tell you that I am an eternal optimist, which means I suffer from the consequence of constantly believing that our best days are always ahead of us, that if we're going to believe in that promise, that we have to let go of the idea that the best days were behind us. And it's important for us to realize that the investments that we make today, the investments that we make in our people, the best assets that we have, is what's going to guarantee and secure a future for us in the future, in the next 20 years. I read a lot of things as an elected official, and there's a lot of things that I believe to be true, some things that maybe are untrue, but I'll tell you what I believe is solid fact. I believe that the state of Texas is the best state to do business in. I believe that the state of Texas is the worst state to be a kid in. And I don't mean that in the Toys R Us sense of kid can be a kid. I mean that in the fact that 1/3 of our young people live in poverty, more than 1/2 do not attend preschool, 3/4 are not proficient in reading, and 1 in 10 children is uninsured. That's the last of the statistics that I'll use, because I'm sure I'm going to be fact-checked about this as we report in just a few minutes, the new numbers. But I think the point is clear that we need to be prepared to invest in our young people. And this is the problem that we face in this city. This is the problem that I think we face in the state. Young people, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 15-year-olds, are not holding political rallies. Our 3-year-olds are not writing our legislators about what they need for early childhood education. Nobody over the age of 18 is eligible to vote, and no matter how well-funded your piggy bank is, no contribution that you're going to make is going to get the attention of elected official. So the problem we have is a possibility and a solution that I offer to you all as members in this room, as speaking for a constituency that can't speak for itself, and standing up for young people that can't stand up for themselves. So I do think, and I do believe, that kids lose when we lose sight of the future. Kids lose when we lose sight of our priorities, and kids lose when we take the easy way out with regard to budgeting, with regard to cost-cutting initiatives, and with regard to where we make our investments. And I say the easy way out because it is oftentimes really difficult to get folks to invest in something that they can't see, something that they cannot touch. And I will tell you from personal experience that it's much easier to sell to your residents, to your voters, something that they'll be able to put a name on, something that they'll be able to walk into. But when you talk about investing over the next 10 years, over the next 20 years, something that they will not see return on until that time, it becomes very difficult. And so I'll tell you just one quick story about how San Antonio has tried to really create a story, a narrative around this idea of investing early, investing in ways that are difficult to talk about in the short term, but completely understandable when you put the research out and the facts are in front of you. So in November of 2012, our mayor, along with the city council, along with the business community, along with 53% of voters in San Antonio, elected to pass a sales tax increase to fund full-day pre-K. I think a lot of you all know the story. I hope a lot of you all were supporters. But in this city, there was a lot of skepticism. There was a lot of worry and concern when we told folks that the smartest thing to do with $1, if we gave you $1 and we told you to invest it in a person, invest it in people, in our young people, the best time to do that is at the earliest stages of our young people, at the point in which we could make the highest impact and get the highest return on investment. And the good news is that it passed. The good news is that over the next 8 years, and as I speak here today, there are 4-year-olds, thousands of 4-year-olds in a classroom and are not at home because we were able to pass this. That's the good news. The bad news is, or the tough news, is to report to you how difficult it was to go through a campaign to talk about how we need to make these investments, how you had to stand in a town hall of this size with people who are skeptical about the investment that the city is going to make with their tax dollars in what they believe to be maybe just subsidized daycare. So it is difficult decisions that need to be made, not just at the local level, difficult decisions that need to be made not just at the state level, but at the federal level as well. We'll get to talk about what those numbers look like for the state, but we need to be making investments, not just for the next 2 years, but for the next 20 years. And let me tell you about investments that we made 20 years ago. It's 1993. President Clinton is in his first term. The price of gas is just under $1. Ann Richards is the governor of the state of Texas. And 20 years ago, my father was taking courses to be an American citizen and was about to take his test in 1993. And I have to tell you that my own success really relied on the support of a lot of people that weren't members of my family. It relied on support that we got from the city, relied on support that we had from the state. So my family, growing up, we knew what WIC was. We were supported by food stamps. I, as a 4-year-old, I've never known anything but free or reduced lunch, and I often think I think it's strange that I talk to folks and they had to pay for cafeteria lunches. I was also a student who benefited from full-day pre-K. And as I progressed through my education and I went to middle school, I was the beneficiary of a state-funded program that took me in the summer and taught me science and math that I didn't get to catch up in during my regular school year. In high school, I was part of a program that was funded by the city and the state called Communities in Schools, which works with students called Upward Bound, where they prepare students for a college education. And the state funded that same 4 years that I was in high school, funded a dual credit program that it started for the first time. That was able to introduce me to what coursework would be like in college and opened up possibilities for me. And so those are examples of investments made 20 years ago. Those are examples of ways in which I'm certain it was debated at the legislature, it was debated locally about the price and the cost of those programs. And it was debated about the price and the cost of healthcare programs, for nutritional programs, for programs that protect children. But at the end of the day, I think what we need to understand is something that it was a great piece of advice I was passed along with one of the supporters in the pre-K 4SA program. I had just finished up a town hall. I gotten beat up for about 30 or 40 minutes about the merits of the program and why we should be raising taxes to do this. It's really interesting because I'll tell you a quick story. For a few months, I could never forget the quote of one individual who was not a supporter. He said, as I was explaining the research and that all universities have given us really a mountain of data that says that this is where you invest, and by the way, it takes so much time. It takes more than 30 seconds to make that impression on what a person might be saying, and I was using evidence from the Center for Public Policy Priorities, from Stanford, and at that point, the gentleman stopped me and said, "Don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up." And I think that's what the challenge we have before us, the challenge that Kevin Moriarty brought to us, is that you need to be persistent, you need to be aggressive. But I'll leave you with this. As we talk about those debates about the price and the cost of these programs, one of the supporters of the program after that came up to me and said, "You know what?" As he quoted, the philosopher, I'm blanking on his name. He says, and it's a beautiful quote. He says, "Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing." And I will tell you that we can debate the price of everything, and we should debate the price of everything, but we should not underestimate the value of the future. And so we appreciate the work that you're doing here and understanding those investments, and I thank you for your commitment and your dedication to the aggressiveness, the risk, and the challenge that you all are put forward in taking a route that is much, much less or much more difficult to traverse. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for having me.
All right, well, good morning. Is everybody doing okay? Got your coffee? Got your caffeine in? Because I will be showing bar charts, okay? So I want you to be sure you're good and caffeinated before we get going here this morning. All right, we're good? All right. So my name is Frances Deviney. I'm a wanderer too. I don't like the big podium, so I'm going to come over here and talk to you a little more personal. Today we're going to be talking about the release of the new Texas Kids Count book, and it's titled Investing in Our Future, and we've had a great introduction, and I have to say, I hate following such excellent leads. It's a really high bar. Didn't he do great? Are we so glad to have him as our representative? So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I have one foot firmly planted in each of my right brain and my left brain, okay? And for a long time I thought neither the two shall meet. And I'll tell you what I mean. So in my right brain, I was raised in a family with a mom who sewed and was creative and sang, and I ended up also going into theater, and I did dance and musical theater, and that was my artsy side. Storytelling through the arts, right? And then on my left brain side, I grew up in a house with a father who was an engineer. He actually went through the Pythagorean theorem every time I asked him to help me with my math. It was awful. It was terrible. I married a math major and computer scientist. Same guy. Not two different guys, but there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, same guy. And although my degree is in developmental psychology, technically I'm actually trained in stats, okay? Which, by the way, got me in no end of trouble when our daughter was born and she was crying. You know, we bring her home and she's, really upset. And my husband looks at me, he's like, "You're the developmental psychologist. What's this cry mean?" And I'm like, "Dude, I don't know. I can measure the length of the cry. I can tell you like the decibels, and we can make a spreadsheet about it. And in about 6 months, when we have enough data, I can tell you what that cry meant." Okay? So I thought, these are my two worlds, right? And if you ever want to know, like, which side of me people respond to more, you can try this little party trick. And I'm sure many of you have these same two sides, right? When you go to your next cocktail party and someone says, "So what do you do?" And you can say, "Well, actually, I'm really into theater and very engaged into storytelling." And people are like, "Oh, yes, tell me more about that." Or you can say, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I'm a data analyst." And they're like, "I think somebody's calling me over here." And then they wander away, right? Because people are kind of scared of the idea of data. right? They get kind of freaked out by the word data and the notion of data because we think that there's some magical understanding that you have to have about numbers in order to speak about them with confidence, right? Far too many movies that we've seen where the, brilliant mathematician, kind of psychopathic person sits in a room and numbers spin around their heads and they go into their mind palace and they figure out and they find the answer, the truth, right, with these numbers, and they say, aha, I understand, with a big U, right, this understanding. And people get freaked out by that notion that they have to have that in order to be able to talk about data. But if you think about it, and this is what I've learned with the Kids Count project over the last 8 years that I've been working on it, we all use numbers every day to tell our stories. You just don't realize it because you're using numbers that you feel comfortable with. So, I've talked about numbers. I've made you anxious. I'm going to show you pi. Make you feel more calm. Everybody feels good with pi. So think about like when you had your Thanksgiving meal this last week, okay? And you think about how much data you actually heard in your conversations. So things like, dinner's going to be 30 minutes late. So now you have an estimate. You have a sense of time, right? Or you say, oh, Susie made a 98 on her spelling test. Or I lost 10 pounds this fall, but I'm going to gain 15 back just today with the pie, okay? Or dinner's going to be an hour late. Time is stretched out here. Or Dennis ate 3 times as much as his older brother, and you get a sense of that proportion, right? So we talk about data all the time, but it's data that we feel comfortable with. And so what I hope by the end of today, what I'm going to share with you is some data that you can become more comfortable with and share in your stories about children in your community. And that's what Kids Count is all about. It's about making data accessible. It's about trying to help you tell the story. Now, I'm going to share a lot of data points with you today. Don't try to write them all down. What I want you to do is kind of sit back and hear the story. We will share the presentation with you at the end. You'll get an email back from us after today that'll have the presentation attached. So you'll have all these numbers. And I invite you to visit the data center at datacenter.kidscount.org to get all and even more data today than I'm going to share with you today. But we're going to focus on just trying to figure out what the story is for Bexar County and Texas kids. And as Councilman Saldaña already said, we're going to be talking about investment. So how have we been investing in kids? Last thing before we get into the meat of it, I want to say, if you hear anything really interesting, I used to get really upset when people would pull their phones out because I would think, oh gosh, I'm really boring. I'm going to have to start doing jumping jacks and get a lot of energy. But if you want to pull your phone out and share anything or tweet anything or Facebook, and please like us on Facebook, here's our information at CPPP_TX or hashtag KidsCount. And share what you've learned today and start telling those data stories. So, starting our story, I'm going to steal from one of the classics. The greatest form of flattery is stealing, right? So, I'm going to steal from a classic, A Christmas Carol, where we talked about the 3 ghosts, right? The ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost of Christmas future. So let's use that narrative to think about our children. I have 3 big themes around that I want you to go away with today. When we look at our past, we know that when we invest in kids, we have Texas data, when Texas invests in kids, kids do better. Simple. When Texas invests in kids, kids do better. When we look at how kids are doing today, what we see is that we are disinvesting at a time when kids actually need us the most, when things are actually taking a little bit of a turn for the worse in many areas, and we're pulling back. But then, and as Councilman Saldaña already mentioned, there is a bright future, and there is a hope, and we know what works, and we just have to take those steps forward to build a bright future for our kids. So those are the 3 big messages we're going to talk about today. And when we talk about investment, you have to be thinking about, what is it that I'm investing in? You're not going to invest in something you don't believe in, right? And kids always evoke that really positive belief in the future, right? So we have feelings of hope and of promise and of progress. But all of those are just seeds. And if we don't actually put investment into those seeds to grow that hope and that promise and that progress, all of our investment will go to naught. So we have to really focus on trying to build up that hope and that progress and that promise. So investment, investment, investment. What am I talking about? Well, there's lots of different kinds of investment that we can make. We can make that personal investment, that one-on-one time that we spend with kids, right? Which is critically important, particularly to that individual child. As Kevin was talking about at the beginning, trying to find out, did we take care of their needs for childcare? Did we take care of their needs for health care? Then there's also community investment, right? How do we get behind, as San Antonio did with the pre-K program, to really build up for the community? And then we need to talk about investment by the state, because investment has to be equal to the issue that you're trying to solve. And while we cannot forget about individual and community investment, which is critically important, we have to engage at the state level to attack state level issues. And this is where we're going to start with our conversation about the past. In a study we released earlier this year, headed by Dr. Kaylee Bobbitt, wave Kaylee, there you go, we actually looked at 20 years of spending in Texas. We took our Texas data, we looked at where we were spending on kids in the areas of health, in the areas of education, in the areas of nutrition and safety, and we looked to see how did they actually relate to some of these data outcomes we're going to talk about today. And thank goodness, because you never know until you get the data, right? Thank goodness what we found was when we invested more in education, what we found was that education outcomes improved. Woohoo! Yay! Seems logical, but people don't believe it till you get the data behind it. But what was even more exciting than just finding that simple link, when we invested in education, we had improvements in health outcomes. That means more kids were immunized, more kids were insured. We had better health outcomes as assessed by the parents. We actually saw improvements in safety. Fewer children were being abused, and we had fewer children dying from accidents. We also saw improvements in positive youth behavior. Fewer kids who were having babies as teens. Fewer kids engaging in criminal behavior. These are all really good things that we had a direct impact on by making that investment at the state level. We saw the same kind of patterns when we looked at health investments. Thank goodness we invested in health got better, but we also saw improvements in education, safety, and positive youth behavior. And one of our favorite ones was that we saw when we invested more in nutrition, we actually saw improvements in education. We've been talking about this for a long time. When kids go to school hungry, they can't learn. And we have the data to back it up now to say when Texas and the federal government invests more in nutrition programs, we see better outcomes for kids in school. And what's really exciting about this is it's Texas data. So we know we've done right here. So let's go to the present. Where do we currently stand? Well, according to the National Kids Count Project, which looks at all the different states compared to one another, Texas is the 42nd place to be a kid. 42nd. We are number one in business. Number one in business, 42nd place to be a kid. That's a real reflection of a statement of our priorities. Now, I'm not saying we should be 42nd in business. We need to maintain our business status as first in business. That's great, it's a good thing. But it's a statement about what we are investing in, what we are putting our attention toward. So, let's take a look more specifically at where does Bexar County stand and where does Texas stand when we look more closely at the data in 4 areas. We're going to look at economic health, physical health, nutrition, and education. So first on economic well-being. What we have here is a beautiful line graph. I know everybody's not moved by stats and graphs, but I just find it to be a beautiful line graph. And what we see is that in Bexar County, for the most part, particularly in the early part of the 2000s, Bexar County had more children proportionally living in poverty than the state overall. And that this number has been, after a little bit of a dip in the late 2000s, we saw it increasing again. And now it's about 1 of every 4 children lives in poverty. What's really interesting about this particular graph is that poverty continued to climb after the state came out of the recession. After the economy improved, after things were looking better, poverty continued to climb for kids. So why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons. A few of them, many things contribute to this, but a few of them is that economic prosperity for the state does not actually necessarily translate into individual prosperity for families. And in Texas, we have the third highest rate of low-wage jobs in the country. Jobs that pay minimum wage or less. So we've got people working really hard, and we know that because we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country as well. We have a lot of hard workers who are putting in the hours who just don't bring home enough money because they don't have the jobs that pay them well, or they don't have the skills to get the jobs that do pay well. So, one thing I like to make sure everybody understands when we're talking about poverty is that poverty is a very specific income definition by the federal government. Usually people know what poverty looks like. They have a sense of it. You can imagine the child who comes to school every day in the same clothes and doesn't have money for lunch, or a person by the side of the road asking for assistance, asking for spare change. But they may not realize that poverty is a very specific income definition for a family, and for example, for a family of 3, you'd have to make less than $18,498 a year to be considered officially poor by the federal government. If you make $18,499 a year, you have made it. You're no longer poor. Woohoo! Okay? It's a hard line cutoff. And what's interesting about this number is the formula to figure this out hasn't changed since the 60s. It's based on an assumption that we spend about 1/3 of our income on food, and we multiply that amount by 3, and boom, we have the poverty measure. But in fact, more recent research by the Center for Public Policy Priorities shows that when you factor in those big expenses that have really changed quite a bit since the 60s, when you factor in childcare, when you factor in the rising cost of mortgages or rent, when you factor in things like health insurance, which we really weren't part of the family budget back in the 60s, we find that for this family of 3, in order to actually be able to just make ends meet, basic ends meet, that family would need to make about $34,000 a year. That's almost twice that poverty level. So $34,000 a year is actually not a huge income. It's still pretty low for a family of 3, but it's almost twice what we say in the poverty measure and what we use as our determinant of whether families need help or not. So how do we get families to this $34,000 income or more? Well, the obvious answer is education. Bringing more jobs to the community that actually pay a living wage. Well, the first thing we have to do is we make sure our kids get out of high school, right? We have to make sure, and actually, frankly, it starts much earlier than that. We'll come back to this in a minute. It starts in pre-K. It starts with building a very strong education program. But right now, let's look at the high school graduation rate. It is actually, let me rephrase that. This is the attrition rate, which means it's how many kids leave high school before graduation. And what we see is it's gotten better over the last few years, but still in Bexar County, 1 of every 3 kids leaves school between 9th grade and 12th grade. 1 of every 3 kids leaves before getting that high school degree. That really limits their opportunities for the kinds of jobs they can get. That limits their opportunities to be able to get any kind of post-secondary education. And what we see when we start looking at post-secondary is that Bexar County is right on track with Texas when we look at how many kids end up going to 4-year colleges. So of the kids who graduate from high school, about 1 in 4 start a 4-year college, and then about another 1 in 3 start a 2-year college. So about right on track with the state. Unfortunately, after they get in college, what happens? We're so focused on trying to make sure kids get in college, we forget to actually support them once they're there. And what we find is that at Bexar County, we have a much higher rate of student loan default. It's harder for kids to be able to maintain the payments back on their student loans after they've graduated. And we find that 2-year students, there's a much lower rate of those 2-year students who end up getting a bachelor's degree, that 4 years bachelor degree. So, the reason this is so important, and this is logical, but we're just showing the data to back it up, is that if you have a high school degree, or you have a college degree, you're much less likely to live in poverty. And the reason that is important is because poverty creates that cycle for the next generation, right? If you drop out of high school, you're almost twice as likely to live in poverty than if you just get that high school degree. And then if you get a four-year degree, you're about you're about 6 times less likely to live in poverty as somebody who drops out of high school. So that educational track is critically important, and that requires investment and commitment in making sure that we close those education funding gaps, and we'll come back to that in a minute. So how does this impact health? Well, we know for a fact that kids who grow up in poverty have worse health outcomes. They're more likely to be sick, they're more likely to miss days of school. And we actually find, too, that this is really related to the percentage of children who are uninsured. So parents rate their kids on how likely they are to be in excellent or very good health. And what we find is that if a child is uninsured, they're much less likely to be considered in very good or excellent health. Public insurance is a little better, but even still not quite as good as if you have private insurance. This is often a reflection of the fact that we don't have as many doctors as we need to be able to cover the people who have public health insurance, to be able to get in for preventative care. So the uninsured rate is a really big deal. The sad side of it is that 1 of every 9 kids in Bexar County is still uninsured. The good news part of that story is that's way better than it used to be. That's way better than it used to be, okay? Even just a few years ago, we were at 1 in 5, 1 in 4 kids uninsured. And the reason that has gotten better is because we made investments of time, of people, of money at the state level to say, we are going to close the gaps. We made some mistakes back before in the 2000s. We made a few mistakes, made some choices that actually led to more kids falling off the insurance rolls. But we learned from those mistakes, and we said, we're going to do better, and we're going to get more kids signed up for Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP. And we saw that number go down. Good news, we can actually affect this. The other side of that coin is that 1 of every 2 low-income parents is uninsured. So why is that a big deal? What we're really concerned about is the kids, right? Who cares about the parents? Well, kids don't live in a bubble. They live in their family. And what we know is that when parents are insured, kids are significantly more likely to be insured. And today, we still have about half of the kids who are income eligible for Medicaid or CHIP aren't signed up. Looking at the experience of other states who have expanded their Medicaid programs or done more about reaching out to get parents signed up for health insurance, we actually see what we call a welcome mat effect, where when parents get signed up, a lot of kids who are currently eligible get signed up too. So we could significantly reduce that uninsured rate for kids even more if we could just get parents signed up. But here's the tough thing in Texas. Let's look at the coverage gap. So Texas is falling in, has created a coverage gap for families. So we're going to use 2 families as an example. We're going to talk about the Castros. In this family, it's a 2-parent, 2-child family. The parents are an office clerk and a part-time home health aide. And they make about $23,000 a year. That's just right below the poverty cutoff for a family of 4. Now, if they go out to market and they try to find on the new health insurance marketplace some health insurance for them, their premium is going to be estimated to be about $8,700 a year. Okay? Now, normally, because they're under 100% of poverty, those parents might be eligible for Medicaid. The kids are, but the parents might be too. Unfortunately, they can't get it here in Texas because we've opted not to take the federal dollars to do Medicaid expansion. But you've also heard that there's a subsidy, right? There's a subsidy that you can go in if you go in the marketplace and you make so much, if you make a little money and you don't make enough to pay for it, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you some money to help you pay for your insurance premiums, right? Excellent. The Castros are going to be okay. Well, they don't get any subsidies. They get $0. Why? Because the way the law was written assumed they would get Medicaid. So those families are falling into a giant gap, and they don't get any health insurance coverage. Well, let's look at the compass. So they're two-parent, two-child family. The father is a maintenance worker and the mom stays at home. They make about $24,000 a year. That's just barely above the poverty line. Okay, just $1,000 more a year. Their annual premium's the same, $8,700. They also are not eligible for Medicaid, okay, because they make a little bit more money and because we didn't expand it. They get $8,000 in subsidies to help them pay for insurance. So now what they have to pay out of pocket is $500 a year. And they make $1,000 more than the Castros. This is the coverage gap that we have created for Texas families. And the really sad thing is that if they moved next door to New Mexico, the Castros could get health insurance because they made the decision to expand Medicaid. So we are creating a difficulty for families. We are creating a hardship. We've built a barrier for families to be able to get the health insurance they need. And as you well know, every person in this room has experienced, you have to have health insurance these days to get good health care coverage, right? So today, we have to say, sorry, Castros, no insurance for you. So what about on the nutrition side? Well, what we see is that 1 of every 4 Bexar County kids is food insecure. What does that mean? Well, that means that they live in a family where they have trouble meeting their basic food needs. They may go hungry, they may not know how they're going to come up with their next meal. And actually, we've made strides in this area in recent years. We've actually done better about getting kids who are eligible signed up for what we call SNAP, or the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It used to be called food stamps. We've done a good job at getting people signed up for that. We've done a good job in getting people signed up for, as Councilman Saldaña mentioned, WIC, the Women, Infants, and Children's Nutrition Program. These are really good things, but we still have 1 in 4 of every kid, 1 of 4 of every Bexar County child doesn't know where their next meal is coming from, and they don't know how they're going to get it. And today, we're making choices that make it harder for them to get that food assistance. Even though we've made progress in recent years because of positive choices we've made, we're making choices now that's making it harder. We're reversing those positive improvements that we've made. Just recently, the federal expansion of SNAP assistance has expired. So now a family of 4 is going to get about $396 fewer a year for food assistance. And that seems like, I can't really figure out what $396 mean in terms of food assistance. Let's talk about it every month. It's about $33 a month. That comes up to 9 gallons of milk or 23 loaves of bread, okay, that they cannot buy now because they've lost that food assistance. And we're talking about making even more cuts to this program, this basic food assistance program, when 1 of every 4 of our Bexar County kids is in danger of going hungry. So, how does this all impact education? Well, we know, and we talked about it before, if kids are going to school unhealthy, if they're going to school hungry, they're not going to be able to learn as well. On the good news side, we've seen some really big improvements in education. But we have to start before they get to school, right? As we talked about, kids are products of their family. They live in their family. They don't live in a bubble outside by themselves. And Texas has the highest rate of families that don't read to their children on a regular basis. 1 of every 4 kids who are in preschool age are not read to on a regular basis in Texas. That kind of puts them at a disadvantage when they get to school. They've heard about 1 million fewer words if you live in a low-income family. And their just exposure to language is very reduced, and that makes them further back in terms of their school readiness. On the good news side, and this still seems low, but on the good news side, we've actually have about half of our 4-year-olds are attending preschool. And this number is a little old, and it doesn't account for what we've seen in terms of improvements from the pre-K for SA program. So we expect to see this number going up significantly in the next few years. So 50% of our kids are going to preschool. That's a big increase from where we were before. It was about 1 of every 3 kids just a few years ago. So about half our kids going to preschool. A lot of that has to do with the commitments and investments that we made, choices we made. At the state level, we said we want to make sure that we expand the pre-K program, and we're going to do pre-K expansion grants for schools when they want to build more programs or bring in more kids, okay? That's really good news, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen this number go up. And we know this is really effective. Representative Villarreal from San Antonio, his office did a data analysis, and they looked at data from from Texas, and they said, when we look at kids who attended pre-K and kids who didn't attend pre-K, and specifically those kids who are economically disadvantaged, how did they do later on their tests? Because, testing is everything, right, in this state. So, how did they do on their tax tests? What we found was that for the low-income kids who attended preschool, they did better in 3rd grade on their passage rates on the tests. So it does have a longer-term effect. It is a positive effect. We're getting a return on our investment there. It's good news. And we've actually seen a decrease in the achievement gap for kids. We see this in math and reading. This particular one is for reading. And these are the passage rates for economically disadvantaged kids versus non-economically disadvantaged kids. And what we see is that since between 2000 and 2011 on the tax test, we haven't had enough of STAR to know kind of how that's working, but if we look over the last decade for the tax, what we see is that there was a 20-point gap, and now there's just an 11-point gap. Still a gap, but it's closing. Now, I'm not saying it's all due to pre-K, but that's certainly contributing to that positive movement there. The more kids we get in and get them school ready, the better they're going to do. And as we talked about before, although nearly 1 of every 3 kids is leaving school before they graduate, it's an improvement. This has gotten better. And a lot of that has to do with programs like Communities in Schools that we talked about earlier. It has to do with college completion program or high school completion programs that we've been funding through the state. Really good news. This is positive. I usually have to give bad news. This is good news. We've made good choices. This is exciting. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to turn it around and say, well, we have made some choices that's putting us in the wrong direction. In 2011 legislative session, we made a choice to underfund public education by $5.3 billion. Billion with a B, okay? $4 billion of that was just the basic funds, keeping the lights on, paying the teachers, doing the basic stuff. And that other $1.3 billion was for programs like pre-K expansion grants and high school completion grants. The very things that were so effective in moving our data in the direction that we want it to go. We said, we're taking the easy way out. We're going to not make the hard choices, and we're going to cut back on those programs that are actually effective. So, we've talked about the past. We've talked about where we are currently. Where are we going forward? Well, in this legislative session, in 2013, they said, we're going to put money back into education. We said, thank you. That's great. Good news. More money for education. That's great. They put $3.2 billion back. That's good. We're happy about that, moving in the right direction. What we took out in 2011 was about $500 per student. Once you factor in population growth and the increasing cost of doing business, we only put back in $108. And, $108 does not equal $500. Now, it's good. I'm not bad-mouthing the $3.2 billion. It's great. It's the right direction. But we can't say that's enough. We can't say they're just going to have to make do, because what that means is their opportunities are going to be diminished. When you're in crowded classrooms, when you have fewer teachers, when you have fewer resources, you have old textbooks, you're just not going to be as prepared when you go out into the world. You leave Texas and go to another state and you're learning, and you're going to be behind all those other kids. Texas has 1 of every 11 kids in the entire country. We are raising the next leaders and innovators and workers for the country. It is our responsibility, not just for the greatness of Texas, but for the greatness of the United States, to make sure that we really make those key investments. That's my little girl going, what? All right, so what about other investments? Well, as we talked about, when you look at overall how much we're investing in kids per child, and even after you adjust for inflation and adjust for population growth and all that, what we see is that in 2011, we used to spend about $3,500 per kid on education, and now it's down to about $3,000 per kid. In health, we used to spend about $1,400 a kid, and now it's down to about $1,200. In all the other stuff. And all the other stuff, I don't mean to minimize it. We're talking about juvenile justice. We're talking about child protective services. All of those other key components. We used to spend $615 per child, and now we're spending $550 per child. You can't get returns on investments that you don't make. And right now, we are not making the kinds of investments that we need to make in Texas kids. We are 42nd state to be a kid and the first state to do business. Imagine what we could do. Imagine what our kids could do if we invested in kids the way we invest in our business infrastructure. Imagine what we could do. We've already proven that we've done it in the past. We've made small changes that were important and valuable when we invested in the past 20 years. We know we can do it. We just need to do it again. 20 years worth of data showing us that when we invest, kids do better. Right now, we're disinvesting at a time when kids need us most. So where do we go from here? Well, at the Center for Public Policy Priorities, we do a lot of things. We have a big staff. We have a whole lot of work that we do, but I'm going to share 4 big areas that we're working on to tell you what we're doing to try to fight for the future of Texas. In terms of economic opportunity, we're working to make sure that we improve opportunities for kids in their access to college through their student loans. We're working with the state to improve student loan education and student loan opportunities so that kids can go to college and be able to succeed. On the health front, we are working with state leaders to try to convince them how important and how valuable and what a rich resource it will be to bring the Medicaid dollars in from the federal government and expand Medicaid. It'll be a business boon, and it'll be good for the health of Texas. We're also working on the nutrition front to protect the Supplemental Nutrition Program, or food stamps, to make sure that there aren't additional cuts. We're working to expand food access in the schools. We've had some big successes here where we've expanded summer food programs across the state, school breakfast, and school lunch. And on the education front, the biggest fight that we're making, and we're doing lots of different things, but the biggest fight that we're making is to help close that funding gap, that investment gap. So, that's what we're doing. What can you do? Well, the first thing you can do is to join us by showing up today. You're already saying that you're joining us in this fight. By showing up today, you're saying that you care about kids and that you're going to advocate for kids in your own way. But I'll give you some specific things you can do. You can learn more, okay? You can be like that genius with the math all running around him, and you can learn more about data. And I hope you can see that, but it's forabettertexas.org/data. That's our data site where you can access the kids count data. And you can also go to, from that site, you can look at our new data portal, which is called the Texas Regional Opportunity Index, which provides a lot of really good information about payday lenders and college access and things like that. So learn more, get comfortable with data, because that's when you're going to use it. And I'm not saying you have to do a data presentation like this. You don't have to have a Ph.D. in statistics to be able to do this, okay? You don't have to have been doing theater to do this. You just tell your own stories, like you did at Thanksgiving. Throw in a nugget of data here and there to help reinforce what you already know. And tell that story. We have to continue the conversation. We cannot be afraid to get into tough conversations. Because if we ignore them, we're not investing in kids. If we ignore those tough conversations, we're avoiding the tough decisions that we have to make going forward. And we're going to continue on the same path that we're on now. So you've got to tell that story and get out there. And you've really got to act. We want you to act now. And so this is not just a big statement because we're going to actually have you do an activity here in just a second. So be thinking about this. There's going to be a little activity that you're going to engage in, okay? So after the Q&A, don't run away in the Q&A. We have a little activity coming up. So we want you to think about how you can actually invest in Texas kids. What are you going to do? Push yourself a little bit and say, am I going to go volunteer at my kid's school? Or am I going to write a letter to my elected official about saying what I want for Texas kids? You have to act now, because if we don't do it, no one will. Mostly we want to make sure that we keep moving those investments forward, that we keep putting our money and our resources and our time and our human capacity forward to help invest in Texas kids. And if my fancy bar charts haven't convinced you, then maybe these kids will.
I am the future of Texas. I am the future of Texas.
I'm the future of Texas. I am the future of Texas. When I grow up, I want to be an artist.
I want to be a teacher.
I want to be a race car driver.
A soccer player. A doctor. A volcanologist. I want to be a rock star. I want to help animals that are sick. It's important to go to school because you can get a job. So you can be smart. Because people need to know what 1 + 1 is. You need to learn. You learn things that you need to know for the life ahead of you. I like to learn about how the earth travels. I think math is really important. The water cycle. I like to learn about other people's jobs so I know what job is right for me.
When I'm sick, I get tired.
I feel like I really can't move.
Kids go to the doctor to figure out what's wrong with them, so then you don't feel bad anymore.
If you're not healthy, it's hard for you to learn in school. It's bad to be hungry because it distracts me and I really want to eat. And you can't think about learning. It's important to eat the right food to be healthy. It's hard to do your work when you're hungry. See, it's all connected. That is definitely true.
They even made studies about it. Educated kids make a better Texas.
Healthy kids
Make a better Texas.
Kids who eat right
make a better Texas. Invest in us now for a better Texas tomorrow.
So hopefully those little kids and the data I've shared with you today have convinced you about the importance of kind of taking those little data nuggets, taking those stories and moving forward and really investing back in Texas kids in the state. Thank you so much for coming this morning. I really appreciate your time. And if there are any questions, we'll stop and do a little bit of a Q&A here. We've got some time. Any questions about the data we shared today? It was a shock and awe presentation. Everybody's stunned. Yes. There's actually a mic up here if you want. AV, can you? Thanks.
Thank you. I'm Katie Reed, and I'm a school board member from Northside School District. The only piece that I was curious about, or perhaps not comfortable with, is what you call an attrition rate. Do you take into consideration that kids move?
Yes.
That's one of the things in Northside School District. We have a 92% completion rate. Now, that doesn't mean 4 years, but they didn't drop out. They stuck with it until they did get their degree or diploma. And your attrition rates don't sound like ours. Could you explain?
Sure, absolutely. So the data that we provide in the Kids Count project is from the Intercultural Development Research Association, or IDRA. Well, there's a lot of different ways to measure dropout. So I will agree that the way that when you measure attrition, when you're looking at is you look at how many kids start 9th grade and how many kids are still there in 12th grade. There's a lot of factors that play into that. Children who move, children who maybe graduated early, children who unfortunately passed away. Those are the moving and the graduating early and the passing away are very, very small numbers. And the moving, actually, kids move in and move out. So when you factor that in, you're going to actually get a lot of balance out on that overall across districts, okay? So the reason we like the attrition rate, but we also report Texas Education Agency's dropout rate and completion rates on our data center, because we realize that there's a lot of conversation to be had. No measure is perfect. You can argue that the attrition rate is maybe a little more liberal in its definition, but the TEA rate is a little conservative because it leaves out a lot of things like kids who are expelled, and there's a lot of leaver codes to account for kids who aren't there but aren't counted in the fact. So we put both up there so you can see kind of what the debate is and look at it both and make the decision for yourself. But a lot of people feel like, what we're talking about is how many kids are walking across the stage at graduation compared to how many kids there are in 9th grade. And what we see across the state and across counties overall is that there is a big decline. Yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
First of all, I just want to let you know that your presentation was really dynamic and entertaining.
Oh, thank
and I learned a lot too. My name is Jennifer Alanis, and I'm with Catholic Charities. I'm here with 2 of my associates, and we specifically work with refugee education. We cover all of those topics, very important, the finance, the health, nutrition, and education. I guess the one thing that I would like to hear more about is family literacy, because as much as we put into our school-age children and our preschoolers, if we're not educating our parents, we're still going to have a very huge gap. So that's definitely something I would like to hear more in the conversations. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I have to say that is not something that we include currently in the Kids Count database, but I always love getting feedback about other things we could do to kind of build the picture out for kids, and so that's definitely something that we can look into, seeing if we can get some better data on. One thing that we do know, another measure of kind of dropout and educational attainment that doesn't necessarily speak to what's happening in the schools, is looking at how many adults in our population don't have a high school degree or greater. And so we know that Texas has one of the highest percentages of adults who don't have a high school degree, which is certainly going to be related to their literacy rate. At the Center for Public Policy Priorities, we're not currently working specifically on adult literacy, but we are working in collaboration with many other organizations is on adult financial literacy. So we're working very closely with our VITA sites, which is volunteer income tax assistance sites, and with United Ways across the state to be able to support their work in doing adult education around financial literacy. Different than what you're asking, I realize, but that's one of the areas that we're working in. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and we can definitely look into seeing if we can get some better data on it. Any other questions? Yes, Sister Mika.
It's not a question, Sister Susan Mika, Benedictine Sisters, it's not a question, but just a comment on, like the 6 things that you say that we can do, about voting for candidates who will invest in kids. Just what bugs me so much is that, we're saying here in San Antonio, we passed the pre-K initiative, and I just can't remember exactly, but I think it was about 6% or 7% of our voters in San Antonio voted. It's just very disturbing because so few are making the decisions for so many. And in this case, yes, it had a good outcome, but I think until more people in Texas vote, then we're not going to be able to change a lot of the things that that you had up there. And yes, we worked very hard with Nuns on the Bus and all of these other initiatives to try to expand the Medicaid in Texas. And we can't lose that momentum, I think. And there's so many groups working on that. And you just see why it's so important, given what you're saying today. And that's what I worry about when people go to the exchanges or whatever, and then they're saying that they can't get covered. And then what? But, to me, the voting part is just so crucial. So thank you for lifting that up, and I think we should lift that up even more all the time, all year.
I don't know what Bexar County's voting percentage is and kind of the broad, usually we get the biggest turnout in presidential elections. I do know that in Texas, it's a 15% registered voter turnout. It's not 15% of the population. It's of people who are registered voters, 15% turnout to vote. So you're right, civic participation is something that we absolutely have to lift up and bring forward and post about on your Facebook when the day comes, I'm going to vote, are you? Or, all these little things. Keep those conversations going about, and do what you can. Take a busload of your friends over to the early voting station. Whatever you need to do. Don't tell them how to vote. We don't do that. But encourage that voting participation, because until we actually get that picked up, we're not going to see really big change in Texas. Yeah. One last question. Yes?
So, recognizing the focus of this conference and getting started as early as you can, pre-K and all of that, Libby Doggett's initiatives, you touched on this briefly, and that is the efforts, what you are going to do, or what CP is doing to, to try to support higher education, post-secondary education. And while I was driving over here this morning, I listened to TPR here in town, and there was a series of interviews with individuals who'd actually gone through school, graduated, and they graduated at the time of the Great Recession, blah, blah, blah. And 5 years later, they didn't have a job, but they had hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. So I appreciate, the efforts to make loans available, but the real issue there is the cost of higher education. And if we're going to continue these life pathways that have such profound lifelong impacts, what can we do, or what is CPQ doing to actually change the cost of education, not just how much money is available to borrow? I mean, you have kids that get into Harvard Medical School, and by the end of their first year, they're $350,000 in debt. So what are the policy positions here to address this issue in terms of the cost of higher education? Because that has a profound impact on who decides to ever enter higher education in the first place.
That's a really excellent point. Thank you for lifting that up. So, that really comes back to, and I will address your specific question, but on a more broad point first, that comes back to defining what is our public commitment, right? The pendulum has been swinging toward privatizing and having everybody be individual. It's all your responsibility, so you have to pay for it, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and which, by the way, is actually physically impossible. If you lay down on the ground and tug on your bootstraps, you can't get up. So I've always hated that phrase, right? It's not possible. So what we need to really think about is, what was this state built on? What was this country built on? We have this idea of the independent cowboy, right? And that Texans are this really strong independent cowboy. But in fact, it was really more of those cowboys coming together and doing a barn raising that brought this country together. We came out in teams of people that we rallied around each other on our wagon trains and whatever. And, we had communities of people who were together and working together because we believed in a shared commitment and a shared benefit. Now, that sounds all hippie, and I realize that, but that's our history. I know I look like a PTA mom, but I'm a hippie at heart. So, so that is what we have to get back to, and that is where things started turning for higher ed, right? Because we disinvested in higher education in the state, and when we deregulated higher education and stopped investing state money in the public good for having people with higher education degrees, they had to raise their money and they had to raise their tuition rates, and that's when we started seeing tuition skyrocket for students. And in fact, what we're seeing is that it's really hitting middle-class families even harder than any other, because there are opportunities, not enough, not as many as there should be, but there are some opportunities for low-income kids to get into Pell Grants and things like that. Higher-income families can afford it a little more easily. It's the middle-income families that are really struggling with that tuition deregulation. So what we're working on at the center, I will be honest with you, we're not specifically working on kind of state funding for higher ed, but what we're working on is that overall kind of state commitment in the public good. And we're specifically working on public education and the kind of funding and making sure that tuition, that the Texas Tomorrow Fund matching money is put into place, and that we have those resources available for students. But you're exactly right. I mean, I think that just brings up kind of the larger issue that we're facing in the state. So I'll just close by saying how much I really appreciate you coming out this morning. This is a tool meant for you, not for me. It's fun to get up here and share the information with you, but the real use of Kids Count is for you to take it. For you to take that information, use it in your grant reports, use it in your stories, use it at Christmas dinner. You know, you're going to have an awkward conversation with your family at Christmas dinner anyway. It's going to happen. It might as well be about something important, right? So use the data and talk about something that really matters. So I want to bring up one last guest this morning. I'm thrilled to introduce our new executive director at the Center for Public Policy Priorities. Her name is Ann Beeson, and she's going to close things off for us. So thank you very much.
So how about another big round of applause for Frances Deviney and her wonderful work on this critical report about Texas kids. Hi, everybody. I'm sort of one of the lawyers in the House, so they call me up when they want someone to persuade and advocate. So that's what I'm going to do up here in just the last few minutes. And it's really all about a call to action. So many of you in this room have dedicated your careers to helping Texas kids, and we so appreciate that. And what we really want to do is just give everyone in this room a moment to kind of recommit to what you will do in the coming year for Texas kids. One of the things I want to do before I do my little quick appeal is acknowledge that we have a wonderful online audience that's been with us throughout, and so hello online audience, and thanks for being with us. And we will have the full video and presentation available as soon as we end the event today. And you know, I want to return actually to the words of Councilman Saldaña. We actually share a little bit of a similar experience. I'm a Texas native that also went away for a while. I went to the other coast, the East Coast, and did the same thing he did, which was to brag and boast about how wonderful my home state of Texas was, and to try to get back here as fast as I could. And I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be back. And you know, the thing of it is, I mean, all of us who love to brag about the state of Texas, we do have a lot to brag about, as he said. And we also, I think, have a lot more that we can do. And we have these little pins. I'm wearing one. Some of you may have seen it. It's one of our favorite little slogans at the Center for Public Policy Priorities, and it says, "Better Texas." And you know, it's hard to kind of have anybody disagree with the fact that we're all working towards a better Texas, right? Well, I think that's wonderful and it's fabulous, and yes, we're all working for a better Texas. Well, I happen to be a starry-eyed optimist and an idealist like Councilman Saldaña, and I want to just share a little secret that I actually believe in an exceptional Texas. I really do, and I think all of us can believe in a future for Texas that is exceptional. But the only way that we are going to get there is actually by investing in Texas kids. That's what this report's about. It's about what so much of our work is about, and it's about what you all have committed your lives and being here today to doing. This is the fun little interactive part of our presentation today. Some of you have noticed, thank you, sister, for noticing it as well, that we have these little cards inside your folder. So at this point, I want you to all take out these cards, and you'll notice that on one side, it gives just a few examples of things that you could do to invest in Texas kids. Now you'll notice that on the other side, it says, "I commit to investing in Texas kids by," and this is a place that we want all of you to actually write down a couple of things. And here's where I really want you to kind of bring your whole self to this exercise. You know, we have lots of different roles. Many of us are parents. I'm a mom. I have a 13-year-old. Goes to middle school up in Austin. I'm also a professional advocate, obviously, with the center. Many of you also have these different roles you play in life. We're family members, as Frances said. We have other family members we need to convince to do a little bit more of their own part. Well, I want you to think of your full self and really just think about, what will you do? What will you do to invest in Texas kids in the coming year? And so what I'd like you first to do is just to take a minute, and I'll just read off these just to get your juices flowing in terms of things that you could do. The first thing, of course, is to share what you learned today on social media, and we've got a bunch of information. Of course, it's very easy for you to share on Facebook and Twitter. We've got our Facebook address and also our hashtag KidsCount up here for you. You could donate food to a local food bank. You could volunteer at your neighborhood school. I know many of you work at your neighborhood school or you work at schools. You can help a friend or a family member get health insurance through the health insurance marketplace. You all know that that's a big opportunity. We've been having challenges, but they're improving on the website, and people will need help. You can tell your elected officials to invest in our future by investing in Texas kids. And finally, and thank you so much to Sister Mika for pointing this out, we need everyone to come out and vote for candidates who will invest in kids. Before I came to the center, the most recent thing I was doing actually was doing a lot of research for a wonderful institute at UT about civic engagement. And you will not be surprised to hear that, that we are not just 42nd, but actually 51st. We literally rank dead last in rates of civic participation in the state of Texas. And it is not a coincidence that we rank dead last in civic participation and we are the 42nd worst state to be a kid. Those are directly connected facts. And all of these things up here, these are all forms of civic engagement. And we need all of you to exercise all of them every day. So again, I want to just give you a couple of minutes, and then we're going to do something fun with these. So we have Sharpies on the table. Please try to use the Sharpies. Sorry, we don't have quite enough for everybody, but maybe you can share. Write a couple of things on your card. I'm even going to demonstrate. My handwriting's terrible. My 4th grade teacher told me so. On mine, I wrote 3 things. I wrote, I commit to investing in Texas kids by advocating to implement the new universal free breakfast program in the Austin School District. This is a wonderful new law that was passed in the last legislative session, very important. I wrote that I'm going to continue to volunteer to serve on the Community Advisory Council at my son's school. And I wrote that I'm going to continue to spread the word about what more we need to do in Texas to invest in our kids. So just take a couple minutes. I'm going to just let you talk amongst yourselves. Write a few things. We're going to have a few of you share them in a minute as well. Okay, how many people need a couple more minutes to finish? Raise your hands if you need a little more time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you the next little instruction. This is going to be fun. This is the interactive portion of our program. What we would love for you to do, many of you I know have iPhones. Everybody knows that the iPhones or whatever other, I don't mean to be plugging Apple products, whatever smartphone you have, are also cameras. What we would really love for you to do is to help each other actually take a picture of yourself holding this card that shows your commitment to Texas kids. And then post it on your own. You can tweet it if you have your own Twitter account. You can tweet it using our hashtag. You can post it on your Facebook page or ours. We are going to have today be a moment where we grow the movement to invest in Texas kids. So yes, look at this. We've got people doing it. Yay! Thank you so much, everybody. I'm gonna be nerdy and do one of myself as soon as I get off the stage. So there you go. Yeah, help each other out if you need to. These are great. Your Facebook friends are gonna love this, you guys. Okay, we got people still writing. I want to see some more flashes, you guys. Okay, we've got people doing it. Look at that. It's great. These look great. Okay, we've got, even Frances has got hers. She wrote a lot better than I did. Bigger. Okay, these are going to be wonderful, you all, and if you'll post them on our Facebook page too, we will start a little collection, and we're going to share them via, we're going to collect them off of both Twitter and our Facebook page. So now I would love to invite just a couple of people to share what they wrote, what their personal commitment was to invest in Texas kids. So if I could just have a person or two agree to share, and maybe we could have some help with the mics I think we have AV up here in the front and Jennifer helping with mics. Just 1 or 2 people. Yeah, wonderful.
First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get 10 people who haven't voted to vote.
Wonderful. Yay. Love that. Come on, somebody else. Jump on in. Here we go, back there. Ooh, wait, we want to hear you. Just 1 sec.
Okay, we did this as a table.
Thank you.
Register graduating seniors to vote.
Wonderful.
Let people know not just about the school funding gap, but funding equity gap.
Great. And can we just have one more, maybe over on this side of the room? Wonderful. Oh, we've got 2 more. Great. Wonderful.
So I have donate to the Center for Public Policy Priorities.
Oh, we love that. I swear that wasn't a plant.
Continue to teach medical students and pediatric residents about the critical importance of physician advocacy. And lastly, run for elected office.
Yes. Wonderful. And we have one more up here, Ivy. Yeah.
Surrounding county, which is a budget of about $46 million.
Wonderful.
And so we commit ourselves at this table to make sure that all that funding is used up for the children and for their child care subsidies, and to manage it at the highest level, and also to look at the Texas Rising Stars and to look at quality child care providers for our children and to raise that level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to share?
Thank you.
Good. I'm going to just add one more of my own, which I meant to say earlier. Many of us in the room are parents, and I happen to believe that kids make fantastic advocates for kids. And I think it's really important to take this information home. Again, my son would kill me. I do this all the time. And talk about these facts with your own children over the dinner table. A lot of us who are fortunate enough to live privileged lives, we have kids that may not be aware that there are other kids that do not have the same opportunities they do. And really share this information. Have them become advocates in their school for the free breakfast program or expanding access to free lunch. Have them become advocates for expanded health care. It's really a great idea, so I just wanted to add that to our little list today. Thank you all so much for joining us and having a little bit of fun with this. I do think it's going to take all of us getting involved at both a personal and professional level to create this exceptional Texas that we want all of our kids and grandkids to grow up and be a part of. So thank you for being here. Thanks so much again to Francis, to Kevin, to Councilman Saldaña for his wonderful remarks, and go out and let's change the state. Thank you.